Hi, good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. Tony, what a great story. I revived very painful moments for me. Just as Tony were saying, we had experienced a lot of issues, but the main issue was not only the telco, the main issue was also the power. As we run through this presentation, you will see how important collaboration is in order to be ready for disaster response. On September 20, one of the biggest hurricanes in the world hit Puerto Rico. Not only was a Category 5 hurricane, but we've been hit 2 weeks before with a Cat 3 hurricane. It took the entire island's power infrastructure. It left thousands of people without home and even our own. 80% of the National Guard was unaccounted for the first few days of the hurricane. That's a satellite picture of Puerto Rico right after the hurricane. As you can see, the virtual destruction of the electrical power grid and the collapse of the telephone system, because they both run together. Some of you may not know that Puerto Rico power infrastructure is owned by a public corporation, a corporation that has been bankruptcy for the past couple of years. So how do we fix that? We don't have any money. We didn't have the materials to put back the infrastructure together. Till this day, 80% only accounts for the power of the island. 20% of the people does not have power. That's one of the main antenna sites for Puerto Rico. While we were on the hurricane, 90% of the towers were gone. Not only the towers, but the actual radars. FAA radars, NOAA radars were completely destroyed. We didn't have a communication system for the planes to land. The airport was completely useless, and it was up to the braveness of the pilot who were brave enough to actually line the plane there without using any forms of communications. 9 days later, that's how our island looked on the telecommunications sector. Only 50% of the antennas were working. But we did something different. And this is why I said to you that collaboration is very important. Before, the CIO didn't have a leadership role on the entire island. We were more like a small office in the office of the governor that will fix computer and will write public policy with respect to the computer information system. As we move forward to that day, they realized the importance of technology and the importance of communication, and they came to us asking for help. We put together a collaboration room with all the agencies, the key agencies, the Puerto Rico Telecommunication Board, the Office of the Governor, FEMA, and some of the law enforcement agencies from the federal government came in there. In that room, we started the collaboration process to recover the telecommunication. That was our first thing we wanted to do. I was on the Disaster Recovery Center, our data center, and I had power. I had internet connectivity, and I had a telephone connectivity. But guess what? I couldn't call anyone. I couldn't call my dad, I couldn't call my sons, and I couldn't even call the governor. So what was that helping me? We actually went walking to the governor's mansion and asked him what they were going to do. Our command center was destroyed. For some reason, the decision was made to put the command center in a rural area, and the road to get there looked like one of the pictures that you saw before. It was completely destroyed. It was completely inaccessible. So we have to figure out a way where we'll be working. Where will we be working? 72 hours, no government, no decision making. People were looting. The streets were very unsafe at that time. Those times were really sad for us, but we had a small plan, and it was to bring communications up. We called the industry, and they said, we will be here, we will be represented, but we need your help too. And just as Tony had on one of the slides, the cell phone companies and the wireless carriers, to my surprise, some of them, they didn't even have a plan. Some of them were actually asking us for generators, diesel, security. In one of those meetings on a Sunday, the CEO for one of the largest Puerto Rico wireless provider came to me and asked me, I need your national security guard. I need security, because they were stealing the generators. They were stealing the diesel out of the generators. And I looked to him in the eye and I say, I cannot provide you that. 80% of the National Guard is unaccounted for. How can I secure your site if I cannot secure my own? So that's what of my story. They were not prepared. As we started assessing the damage, and they started assessing the damage, they realized that being an island, we don't have a lot of the things on stock. In order to restore telecommunications, the colts and the cows needed to be brought into the island. Some of them, their red tape and bureaucracy is bigger than the government. And in order for us to get the colts and the cows on Puerto Rico, we have to talk to the federal government and the DOD and classify the mission as a mission critical in order to have those cows and colts fly into the island on a military plane. But we work together, government, private industry, and NGOs, to restore the communication. One of the key important aspects that we did, and you should have this as your very first thing for disaster readiness. Put your critical infrastructure in a geospatial database. Make sure that you have access to that. Make sure that you bring the carriers to the table. They will be reluctant at the beginning, but show them our story. That was key. Another key item that we put together, as you saw on the previous slide, we have 15% of the antennas 9 days after the hurricane. Open roaming. Open roaming for all carriers. That was key. And believe it or not, it sounds easy. Ask the carrier to do open roaming between themselves, but it is not. It takes a lot of configuration. It takes a lot of planning. And make sure that that gets written on your disaster recovery and your business continuity plan. That was key in Puerto Rico. I call it a cry for help because it was a cry for help. As I realized that we didn't have any connectivity at all, I had the opportunity in the beginning to went and visit Google. They have an operation in Puerto Rico. We didn't knew what they were doing, but they invite us to go to Palo Alto and visit their X lab. They presented to us what they were doing in Puerto Rico. It was called Project Loon. As crazy as it sounds, it actually works. It's a balloon that flies over very high altitudes that actually brings LTE connectivity to the island. It takes time to deploy. It's not an easy solution to deploy. It took us 6 days to get the FAA approval to have those balloons fly over Puerto Rico. And since we are on island, and those balloons get actually pushed by wind, they don't have an engine. They fly at very high altitude, 50, 60,000 feet. They use the wind currents and machine learning to actually get from point A to point B. So it took us 6 days to get the permit, and for some of the balloons, it will take 6 days or more to get to the island. At any given time, we have to run to the Federal Department of State to get overflight agreement in countries that are not U.S. territory. So that was another thing that we had to deal with. Think outside the box. Think outside the box when you're facing disaster. Just as Tony said, when you face disaster, the plan goes down the drain as soon as that first shot is fired. As soon as you feel that wind hitting your building, hitting your infrastructure, you lost connectivity, you lost power, the plan is gone. So you have to think outside the box. One of the things that ended up in my table during the response, since we are an island, we ran out of money. Literally, the banks ran out of money because people were running through the ATM to cash their accounts. The banking industry came to us asking for help. We didn't have a functional airport, and they needed money. So make sure to include that on your plan. It will happen. People will get desperate. Until this day, and we had a major blackout a couple of days ago, the first thing the citizens went to do, they went to cash out the ATMs. And they went to the gas stations to fill up their tanks. Gasoline is another thing that ended up in my office. You probably say, wow, that's a lot on the plate for a CIO. But the CIO became a CTO for the entire government. We were dealing with gasoline logistics. We were dealing with money logistics. We were dealing with the plane logistics, to which plane will land on the island. And we were dealing with people that didn't know how to use satellite phones. How many, well, I won't ask, but actually I will ask, how many of you know how to use a satellite phone? Raise your hand. Imagine you have 78 mayors, and you give each one of them a satellite phone. We are techies here, right? And only I saw 20 hands raise it. 78 majors were carrying sat phones. They didn't know how to use it. So we have to create a sheet of instructions to show them how to use it and explain it that it was a one-way communication that they can use to call the JFO, the command center. It was not that unless they have the phone outside, it will be used as a two-way communication. FirstNet. As soon as we got there, 2-3 days later, FirstNet phones were all over the place. Guess what? If you don't have a cell phone network, those phones don't work. So people were carrying around, oh, I have a FirstNet phone. Well, try to use it. It doesn't work, and it didn't work. So make sure that your agency heads, your governor, your sheriff, and all of them know how to use that. That's a picture of the cows and colt. Make sure that you talk to your carriers and you have them on your state. Make sure that at least they have 2 or 3 there ready for disaster response. Obviously, in the US, it's very easy. You put it in a container and you drive a truck. That's not the case on an island. And when you don't have a radar to actually guide a plane to land, that becomes a huge challenge. NetHope. That really worked. One of the worst things that I experienced, it was not facing the actual disaster and the destruction, is when all the help started to arrive. You don't know what to do with it. And you don't know how to filter the ones that are there for the good and the ones that are there for the money. When I saw Zuckerberg's post on Facebook saying that he sent a team to Puerto Rico, I was in shock because I was there since Wednesday running the entire operation, and I haven't met no one from Facebook. And then 2 days later, a couple of guys came in saying that they were NetHope and that they were there to restart communications. That actually works. They'll do it. It's an NGO. They'll do it for free. They will restore not only your network and your communication, they will restore the carriers and everything related to communication, they will restore. Now we have a vision of building a resilient Puerto Rico with resilient communication. We're working closely with FEMA and DHS to make sure that we have a plan and resiliency as we move forward. We are asking them to leave the assets on the island. We want to do underground. Just as U.S. Virgin Island, everything was above ground. We have a plan. That picture you see down there of the map of Puerto Rico was the actual system that we put together because the wireless carriers, they will not share the propagation data with you. So we had to create our own algorithm to determine the actual cell coverage on the island. What you see on the far left on the screen was actually the map that we pulled together to realize where we had connectivity and where we don't. Thank you for your time, and thank you for being here. Thanks, Tony. Thanks, Gray, and thanks, NASCIO.